Hey beautiful people, namaste, Shakti here, and I'm feeling a little bit nervous actually, but I've been inspired to begin a video series, a live video series here on Facebook called Rapture for Men, a guide to women's sexuality. I wrote a book last year called Rapture, a guide to sexual and spiritual awakening for women, and it really encapsulates the last 18 years of my professional life and work, and the culmination of that as I became and have been living and working as a priestess of love and sacred sexuality, as a teacher of Tantra and embodied awakening. And last year, towards the end of last year, I really kind of got the clear message. I've been working almost exclusively in that realm with women for about 10 years. And although I had done mixed events as well, authentic relating, conscious relating groups, tantric workshops for men and women, I really was called previously to work only with women. And actually, a part of that reason for making that choice was that I kept getting approached by men who had such a misunderstanding of what Tantra is and what my role is as a priestess of love and sacred sexuality, that they thought that was about me offering sexual services. And I just didn't want to have to deal with that, quite frankly. So that was one reason why I kind of moved to working only with women. But it was also a calling, because my path of awakening has been so powerful, and my calling was to share the fruits of my learning and my growth with women specifically. However, towards the end of last year, not long after publishing Rapture, as I was tuning into where my energy is called to go for this year, I have been given very clear guidance to go back out into the world and begin to host mixed spaces again for men and women who are called to the path of conscious relating, of Tantra, of sacred intimacy, of inner unification of the divine feminine and the divine masculine, which for me ultimately was what all of this work is about. And I feel like a little bit nervous. I feel a little bit scared to kind of be doing this, but that is the calling. The calling is there. And it feels like something that's actually really important, having worked exclusively with women for so long. And, I know I'm a part of this huge surging up of the energy of the divine feminine in the world, right? I'm one of many women doing this kind of work in the world. Women have been awakening, the divine feminine energy has been arising, and it's really critical now, particularly in this time, we're all feeling it, right, of huge change in the world and huge shifts and transformations, that men and women, masculine and feminine, find their way together. Because we go into women's spaces and women's circles to do our inner work and to do our inner healing and to do our inner growth and to activate and evolve and awaken. And of course, and people make this assumption that this is not included, when I work with women, the masculine is a huge part of that. We have to connect with and heal our inner masculine to come back out as whole women, right? Self-fulfilled and sovereign. But then there is the other piece, which is actually being together, men and women in the same room, in the same space, and then navigating and negotiating what happens there. Because we may do it for ourselves and within ourselves, but then what happens the minute we begin to relate, the minute we become intimate, the minute we, like I posted one of my very personal posts just the other day, like come across someone on the dance floor and there's kind of this instant attraction. What do we do with it? How do we navigate that with conscious awareness, right? And it feels like this energy of union and communion is super, super important at this time. So, I'm taking a leap And I have no plan or agenda for this. I'm just going to speak. My intention is probably do a live every weekday, going through the chapters of my book, Rapture, A Guide to Sexual and Spiritual Awakening for Women. But I'm going to be speaking to men around the content of this book. And I'll tell you why. Because part of this bridging that I feel needs to happen is a mutual understanding. You know, you've probably heard of the book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. And, you know, there is some truth, as far as I'm concerned, there is some truth in that we've been living in an age where there's been this assumption that we're all the same, and we're actually not. You know, what I'm going to say may be contentious for some. You may disagree. That's fine. You don't have to take anything I say as truth. You don't have to agree with anything I say. But my hope is that in these sharings, that whether you're a man or a woman, you're going to take something away and refine your understanding, develop more compassion, open your heart to the men and women in your life with more understanding. Yeah, with more compassion, with more understanding, with more love for yourself and then for those in your life. So let's start today with the first chapter in the book. And the first chapter in the book is called My Erotic, Her Story. And yes, it's deliberately called Her Story instead of History, because we've been living in a society, a culture very much determined by the patriarchy, which is a very masculine dominated, masculine assuming way of perceiving the world and structuring the world. Okay, so I call it My Erotic, Her Story deliberately. And this first chapter opens the book inviting women who read the book to literally sit down and write their erotic her story, so that they begin to understand the patterns that have played out in their sexual and relational lives since the beginning, right? Now this, of course, this already brings up one thing, which is that I think men tend to compartmentalize more than women. I am going to make some generalizations again. I'm not going to make any apologies for that. I'm speaking in general terms, and this is going to be beneficial for a lot of people. Men tend to compartmentalize their thinking more, but really sex and relating aren't separate. They go hand in hand, particularly for women. Their sexuality is not separate to their relating and their relationships. You can't have sex with somebody unless you are relating to them. It doesn't have to mean that you're in a relationship, but there is a relating that is going on between two people, right? So I invite women to sit and to write their erotic history, to begin to see into their wounds, their traumas, their triggers, their patterns, to begin to see and join the dots between what happened when they were 5, when they were 16, when they were 18, when they were 21, however old you are, because this begins to illuminate for you greater self-understanding, right? And so if you're a man watching this, I would invite you to do the same, to begin to highlight what are your patterns in relating. How do you use your sexual energy? How does your sexuality play out in the world, and how has it? And how has that worked for you, right? Because you get to begin to ask some really deep and honest questions, like, where did I experience pain? Where did I experience heartbreak? Where did I experience pleasure? Where did I feel I was being honest with myself? Where did I feel bad about what I did? Where did I feel great about what I did? How has my relationship with my mother or my father, how has that impacted upon my relating and sexuality today? Because of course it has. In very, very simple terms, how you relate to the opposite sex, or the same sex if that's your preference, right, and how you deploy your sexuality will be directly related to your relationship with your mother and father and how you were parented. In actual fact, relating and sexuality are typically, until we make the unconscious conscious, an unconscious way to attempt to rectify wounds and triggers and traumas from our childhood. And so we pick partners who are exactly the right ones to trigger our wounds, to highlight our shadows, because the unconscious wants to find resolution. And so unconsciously, until we make it conscious, our partner choices are always going to be exactly those people who are going to be a mirror reflection of those areas within ourselves that we can't see, that have been hidden, where work needs to happen, where healing needs to happen. And so the potential that is there is to come into fuller self-awareness and to come into greater wholeness within yourself through relating with others. What tends to happen, though, is that we end up blaming the other for what we're feeling and blaming the other for our experience rather than taking responsibility. So I want to get a little bit more specific. And again, I really hope that men who are watching, who are listening, that you can really receive what I'm saying into your body with an open heart as you breathe and feel, and women too. Right, I'm going to be specific and give you some highlights from my erotic herstory, just quickly, to just illustrate a few things. So, for example, my first exposure to male sexuality as a girl, a pre-pubescent 7 or 8 year old, I was out playing in a park with my cousin, a younger cousin, male, and an old man called us over to where he was standing. And when we went over to where he was standing, like being very open-hearted, innocent children, and this was like a long time ago, so there wasn't this kind of fear of people that there is now. And his dick was hanging out of his trousers on purpose. And I didn't realize until we got close. I noticed that and I was shocked. And then he said, "Do you want to see some more?" to me and to my male cousin, and began to touch himself. That was my first encounter with male sexuality. And you know, as I talk about it, actually, I can still feel feelings of vulnerability rise up inside my heart and my body and my chest now. You know, and now I'm like a 57-year-old mother of 2 who's done all this inner work. But when I refer to that incident, I can still feel the impact of it in my body now. I almost feel like I want to cry. Right? That was just one incident. Moving on from that, my experience growing up as a teenager from about the age of 12 onwards was to be catcalled, to have, catcalls, whistles, sexual comments, objectification from adult men all the time. Walking to school in my school uniform, going to school on the school bus. That was normal. Going interrailing when I was 18, still a virgin, with my best girlfriend, at least 3 times men had their dicks out and were wanking in front of us or exposing themselves to us. Okay, so I'm just building up part of my erotic herstory. So this isn't like you might have been expecting me to tell you all these juicy details of my sex life, right? This is the important stuff, because these kinds of things are what shape us as sexual beings, as relational beings. You know, I didn't ask for any of those events to happen, but they happened. And for sure, they've shaped who I am and how I respond to men now, or how I did, and yes, still now, right? I could go on and tell you many more stories of attempted rape, having a man run up and put his hand up my skirt in London when I was walking home, like being touched on the tube. Those kinds of things have been part of my experience too. Another important thing that I've forgotten to mention is my relationship with my father. How is that relevant to our sexuality, to our relating, you may be asking? Oh, so relevant. Oh, so relevant. So our father, like for women, the father is the first male in our lives. So how that relationship with our father goes is going to have a huge impact upon how we then relate to men. And man, if you're watching this, it's going to be the same for you the other way around. Your relationship with your mother is going to have a huge impact upon how you project onto and relate with women. Undeniably. So you need to look at it. You need to understand it. You need to know what those dynamics were. So for me, and this is very common for a lot of women, my father was a really great dad until I was a teenager. And then the minute I went into puberty, I don't know where he went, but he was absent emotionally, completely unavailable, working like a workaholic, working very hard. So he was providing for the family, very stereotypically the patriarchal head of the household kind of father figure, very controlling, very dominant, egotistical, semi-narcissistic, lacking in all empathy, slightly violent. So that was the male model that I grew up with. So of course that has shaped, again, my inner masculine, my relationship with men, my relating with men, my partner choices. Because there's that set up within me, an unresolved need to be seen by the masculine, to be loved unconditionally by the masculine, because I did not feel loved, I did not feel seen, I did not feel wanted, I did not feel listened to, embraced, understood, supported by the first man in my life. And that's very common for a lot of women, to feel this sense of abandonment by their fathers. And so they go looking for this in their relationships with men. And if you're sitting there going, oh yeah, I know that, yes, and you will have the equal and opposite wounding to that, right? You know, opposites attract. So it's equal and opposite for men. Often there is this sense of smothering by your mother, overwhelmed by your mother, feeling responsible for her emotions. And so then that kind of wounding in men, until it's resolved, until you see it, until you begin to work with it and become more conscious of it, makes you more prone to be unavailable in relationship, or to run away when a woman gets emotional, or to feel overwhelmed when a woman, even if she's not making you responsible, it just reminds you so much of your mother that you're projecting your mother onto her. And in the same way, women project their father onto men, or look for the replacement father figure in their men. So this is why writing out your erotic her story or history is such an important exercise, because you begin to cultivate greater self-awareness. I'm also telling you, some of these details of my own erotic history because they highlight themes that I really feel if men understood the depth and the power of these kinds of wounds in women, there would be greater compassion and sensitivity in relating and sexuality. I've just skimmed the surface of all the ways in which male sexual energy, which is by nature penetrative, right? And that can be a wonderful thing, and it is a wonderful thing when it is aligned, and aligned with the heart, and aligned with awareness and consciousness. When masculine penetrative energy comes at a woman without permission, without seeing her as a person, it's very damaging. And my experiences from a very young age of being objectified, so not seen as a person with a heart, with feelings, with vulnerabilities, not being seen as a person, being seen as a sexual object, being projected onto constantly, being grabbed at, being almost penetrated against my will. That's going to set up certain barriers in my heart and certain barriers in my body and my energy system, and elements of mistrust towards the masculine, like, is he interested in me? Does he just want to fuck me? Right? How can I trust this? These wounds are very common when I work with women, which I have been doing for a long time, when I hold space. At least a third of the women in any circle has been sexually abused. Abused. Pretty much everyone has experienced forms of harassment that are unwelcome. So, that's big. And for us to begin to shift this kind of dynamic in society, in culture, which for me is actually part of the root of war. There's war going on in the world in many places. For me, I see the root of that in these kinds of unconscious dynamics. So personally, I believe we need to start talking about it and owning it and listening to one another and really beginning to get to the root of where these behaviors stem from, and bringing love and compassion and understanding and awareness to them, because they are so tender. There are so many clients that I work with who have been sexually abused, sexually traumatized, sexually harassed. Yes, it's not every woman, but it's a very common experience. And there's so much shame around it, because when that's happened to a woman, she feels responsible, she feels ashamed, she feels dirty, she feels disgusted, and it can create reactive behaviors that lead into things like a lack of sexual boundaries, hypersexuality, becoming highly promiscuous, not because that's actually her natural expression, but it's because of growing up in that kind of environment. That was the way that she learned to get attention. And for her, being sexual was the way to get attention, which she interpreted as love, but it's obviously not. Right? So, very common experiences, mine is just illustrative, for women are the experience of being objectified, the experience of being penetrated when we do not want to be, energetically or physically. It can just be a look, it can be words, but it feels like a violation. Our relationship with our fathers, and then of course our ongoing experiences. All of this is shaped by, and has been shaped for men and women, by the patriarchy, by religion, by culture, by this programming of the patriarchal system. And I want to talk about that in the next video. And I also want to, I just want to go forward a little bit further, because I kind of stopped when I got to my initiatory sexual experiences, and that was before I'd even had sex. I've talked about some of the negatives. I also want to talk about some of the positives, like having experiences with partners who were like more sexually experienced and aware and were able to open me sexually to experiences of incredible bliss and incredible pleasure and incredible joy in my sexuality. And I'm so grateful to those men who brought those qualities. Like one was a tantric meditator. We were in a committed relationship for a couple of years. Another committed relationship where my partner also brought those beautiful qualities. He had more sexual experience to me. He'd read The Joy of Sex. He was very sexually open and experienced. And it was beautiful to have that experience. I also want to mention, like in a woman's erotic history, of course, for a woman, her periods, her cyclicity, her bleeding times are integral to her sexuality. They're not separate. The fact that she menstruates, that she bleeds once a month, that she goes through hormonal cycles and emotional cycles are a part of her sexuality. There are times of the month when she's fertile and not fertile. There are times of the month where she's more sexually open and less sexually open. There are times of the month when she's more creative and expressive, and there are times of the month when she's more introverted and quiet. This is natural. This is to be honored. This is to be supported. This is to be respected. When a woman taps into her cyclicity and her flow, she's a woman in her power. She's a woman in touch with her body, in touch with her sexuality. So as a man, your role is to understand and support that in her. Part of that cyclicity also involves, and can, well, not always, but can involve conceiving, can involve pregnancy, childbirth, lactating, motherhood. A woman's sexuality doesn't stop when she's pregnant. It doesn't stop when she's a mum. It doesn't stop when she's lactating. It doesn't stop when she's in menopause. There are lots of misconceptions about female sexuality out there, right? The nature of her sexuality changes through those seasons and through those times. Her body changes, but her capacity for pleasure, her capacity to be sexual is always there through all of those phases. But what a lot of women say to me, and what I also experienced, was that those critical junctures of pregnancy, motherhood, lactation, and menopause can really, really put a spanner in the works in terms of relationship and in terms of sexuality. So this is when a lot of understanding is needed of what she's going through, because it doesn't need to spell out the end of anything, actually. But it does require awareness. It does require understanding. There can be, and I'm going to talk about this more tomorrow, this part of the patriarchy is this split of men and of women into the virgin and the whore. Like, she's a good girl, she's a bad girl. She's the slut that you sleep with. She's the one who's your best friend. She's the mother of your child, but then she can't be sexual, you know. This is sadly part of the patriarchal programming, but it's so destructive to relationship and to healthy sexual expression. You know, I want to break down these dualistic conditions and programmings and illusions. Women are highly sexual beings. They are designed to embody sacred sexuality. And that moves all the way through pregnancy, lactation, motherhood, and menopause. It doesn't die off. So her erotic, her story, your erotic history. Take a look, ask questions, explore, understand yourself. If you're with a partner, ask her, have this conversation. When you go deeper to this level, you'll begin to see and understand patterns that have been there for a long time. And this is how we then begin to move from a more conscious choosing place, rather than just allowing our sexual energy to be the leader, you know, without including the heart, without including our awareness. It starts with knowing ourselves. And if we know ourselves better, then we can be more self-responsible. But, you know, I guess I'll conclude this by referring to something very beautiful and inspiring and healing and helpful. A few years ago now, must be at least 3 years ago actually, because it was before lockdown, obviously, I co-facilitated a workshop with, oh my God, I've forgotten his last name, with Nick, I've forgotten his last name, with one of the leaders of the masculinity movement, one of the original founders of the masculinity movement in the UK, conscious masculinity. And we hosted this beautiful workshop for men and women, which was called Rewilding and Reconciliation. And it was about this return to our original innocence, sexually, spiritually, relationally, and about taking radical self-responsibility and also honoring the pain, the suffering, and the wounding of the other, while taking full responsibility for the times when, as men or women, we had been the victim and the perpetrator. And yes, we had all played that role. We had all been victims and we had all been perpetrators, right? You know the triangle, the victim, the perpetrator, and the rescuer. It's a dynamic. And it was such a profound and powerful experience to be in a room with a group of men and women who were willing to get really honest and really vulnerable and own the times when they had been the perpetrator, and look the men in the room, like we were speaking to the men in the room as a group of women, look them in the eyes and tell them all the times we had been the perpetrator and say sorry. And then the men did the same. They owned all the times they had been the perpetrator and looked us in the eyes and said sorry. It was a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful moment. And my belief is this is what needs to begin to happen more and more and more. But it starts with us understanding our own history, our own erotic background, our own familial conditioning, our own cultural conditioning, rather than making the assumption that how we are is just how things is, because it's not. It's a programming, it's a conditioning. And whatever's happened to you in your life will shape how you're showing up in the world right now. So it's time for us all to take responsibility. Because when we do that, everything changes. And that's why I refuse to point the finger at any man. If I'm feeling triggered and like a man has done something wrong to me at this point in my life, I take it all inside and I have a look and see what my part in that was. It's much easier to blame. It can be more challenging to look inside. My erotic history. So that's the first part of my sharing. And the next live I do, which I think is going to be tomorrow, I'm going to go on to the next chapter. Chapter 2 in the book is called Everything You've Been Taught is a Lie. So I'm going to unpack a few more things there. I really hope that this has been interesting, inspiring, made you think, made you question, made you feel. If you've got questions, post them underneath. And if you're watching and you want to buy the book, it is available on Amazon. Just look it up, Rapture by Shakti Sundari. thanks for watching, guys. And yeah, let me know how this was. It's a bit of a leap today to do this, but I just felt inspired. So yeah, thanks for your support. Lots of love.